Shatira Roll here, digital cinematography major at Full Sail University Online, and I will be going over the evolution of horror. Now, what comes to mind when we think of horror? What impact has the genre had on our society, and how has society impacted the genre? The first actual horror film was called The Devil's Castle, directed by Georgios Milius. But the most notable horror film would be the 1922 Nosferatu, directed by F.W. Murnau, which was known to be the most influential film of its time. Now, the 1930s proved to take a new face of sound. The birth of talkies helped filmmakers utilize sound to scare, frighten, and entertain audiences, giving birth to such classics as Frankenstein, The Mummy, and my favorite, Dracula. The 1940s would see the debut of the Wolfman. Meanwhile, Dracula and Frankenstein monsters would appear in the numerous sequels, often known as the Monster Rally films. The 1950s brought forth science fiction films with horror elements, which was a new wave of fear. The threat of nuclear war and the painful memory of real life horrors in the 1940s regulated horror films creatures otherworldly as Blob and Aliens. Now, the 1960s took a turn and evolved. Enemies were no longer monsters and aliens that we created, but now of society as it changed in the time of revolution. Alfred Hitchcock's film Psycho was a classic, as well as zombie films, the very first known zombie film, which was Night of the Living Dead. The 1970s social paranoia led to the creation of a string of horror films that were monsters, but were essentially a normal person that just gone wrong. Beginning with The Exorcist, and these movies revealed in the making components of true gruesome, just as the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. The 1980s began to catch up with the vision. Advanced special effects made gore seem even more realistic. The 1980s saw a wave of gore B movies, horror films, many of which became cult classics and later saw success with critics. The first half of the 1990s, the genre continued many of the themes from the 1980s. The slasher films, especially later in 96 with Wes Craven's Scream, featured teenagers who were fully aware of and often made reference to the history of horror films and mixed ironic humor with shocks that reignited the slasher film genre. The new millennium became a decade of new wave of gruesome and gore, along with remakes of some of our favorite classics with a mixture of wave and a new horror that still depicted the reference idea of horror films since the early 20s. Horror film evolution throughout the years has given society a new approach to the want and need to be scared and startled. Society is our biggest fear. Over time, we have adapted to change, fear, and of course, the horror. Thank you for watching.